Good morning, radio station. Stand by for commencement of today's press briefing from Roseau in 2 minutes. Good morning, radio station. Stand by for live broadcast in 60 seconds. Radio station, stand by for live broadcast in 30 seconds. Stand by in 15 seconds. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and...
Good morning, one and all, and thank you very much for joining us on yet another of the press briefings hosted by the Office of the Prime Minister. I am Kamala John Baptist Aaron, Press Secretary. Housekeeping matters first this morning. The schedule of the press briefings has changed, just for your information. The press briefings have moved from daily to now on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Of course, the Office of the Prime Minister is at your service, so whenever there is a change of any kind, we will let you know accordingly. And so we want you to take note because, of course, we want you to continue to participate in the press briefings to give you an update as often as possible on what is going on in Dominica post Hurricane Maria. Now, today's press briefing will focus on the Dominica Water and Sewerage Company, DOWASCO. As you may be well aware, water is often said is life. And so because of that, it is of significance to not only the people of Dominica, but just in general, an important aspect of the daily living of people, businesses, and the like. The press briefing this morning, as you may be aware, will take the shape in the following way. We will hear first from the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Water Resource Management, Lucian Blackmore. We will also hear from Ivanira James, who is the Operations Manager at DOWASCO, and the Chief Engineer at DOWASCO, Mr. Magnus Williams, will tell us about the lay of the land, engineering-wise, and we know that you want to know when water is coming your way. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring to the podium, or ask to come to the podium, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Water Resource Management, Mr. Lucian Blackmore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first of all recognize the Press Secretary, Mrs. Aaron, the press corps, and of course members of the public listening, as well as the people in the diaspora viewing us this morning. As was introduced by the Press Secretary, of course, water is one of the most essential commodity And I think maybe it might be only second to air in terms of the most useful substance that we need for everyday living. Of course, we all can appreciate if the absence of air, what it would do to us. In the same way, by this very same token, the absence of water, what it does to us. And I was happy that the press secretary started up with that note, because I constantly remind the team at DOWASCO that they mustn't feel daunted by the excruciating pressure that is being brought to bear on the company at this point. Because none of us could be in our comfort zone if one household is without water. And that's why 3 weeks ago, approximately, the last time we were here, we gave you the commitment that DOWASCO will do everything within its power to ensure by Christmas time, most of the households without water, or most of the communities without water, pipe-borne water that is, would be serviced by potable water by that date. And so I think it is very fitting this morning that the presentation team this morning, Mrs. James, the operations and maintenance manager, and Mr. Magnus Williams, the chief engineer. Mrs. James will give you some very good background on the operational issues, where we were then, when we last spoke to you, and where we are now, relative to where we want to be by Christmas time. As you know, Christmas time, since that we're in the first week of December already, we can say practically it's 2 weeks away. And so it's not very much time again. It's just about 10 days time we should be able to know what the reality is going to be. I think that is very important, because at the end of the day, we have to appreciate the significance of the impact of Hurricane Maria on DOWASCO. Approximately 93% of the entire network within the country was without potable water. Only a few communities were fortunate, that of Penville, Vickers area, Campbell, and I think to an extent Cochrane. But besides that, every other community, every other water area was left without water, came from Hurricane Maria. And so this morning, we will give you a perspective of what are some of the challenges that we are still facing, how we intend to overcome those challenges, and to ensure that we make it happen for you around Christmas time. Of course, it is a concern for every one of us, you as the customers out there, you as the members of the public, and of course, even from the ministry standpoint, I can tell you every day the minister will not hesitate to remind every one of us, even at the ministry level and DOWASCO level, it is so many days after Maria, and we still haven't had full water coverage. Where we are now, when are we going to make it happen? And to ensure that nothing is spared in the relentless effort to ensure we improve the quality of our response. And of course, Mr. Williams will also give you the perspective in terms of the recovery and the reconstruction focus, how we intend going forward. Because as has been mandated and proclaimed by the Honorable Prime Minister, that Dominica is going to be one of the first climate resilient countries of the world. And of course, water being such a precious commodity, would have to be foremost in ensuring that becomes a reality. When we talk about resilience, we're not only talking about physical resilience in terms of the country, we are talking about social, we're talking about economic resilience. And so it is very important for us to understand that the role that water resource has to play in the whole process, both from a standpoint of the distribution system and also to ensure that the operations and management aspect of the resource is done to the highest global standard. And so this morning, I will first ask Ms. James, when she's coming to the podium, to give you that perspective of to where we were the last time we spoke to you, where we are now, and how we intend to ensure that by Christmas time, in 2 weeks' time, we will have full water coverage for everybody. Thank you very much.
We thank you as well, PS, Housing, Lands and Water Resource Management. Without question, a tough order, Housing, Lands and Water Resource Management. Important resources as we continue to get back on our feet post-Hurricane Maria. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity to call to the podium the Operations and Maintenance Manager at the Dominica Water and Sewerage Company, DOWASCO, Ivanira James.
Good morning. DOWASCO continues the restoration of the water supply to all communities in Dominica. All our 44 water systems were affected by Maria, and the damages were as follows: intake structures, supply pipelines, distribution pipelines, watersheds, loss of forest covering, changes of the river course, excess of siltation, boulders, debris, landslides, riverbank erosion, and more. The present ongoing restoration works are temporary, meaning that we are still on immediate emergency relief works. The Build Back Better will take place with the overall new project designs and implementation. In the emergency relief works to provide potable water supply, we were assisted by the government of Dominica and many international agencies, such as UNICEF, WASH Network, PAHO, Samaritan's Purse, Caritas, UNDP, USAID, Regional Water Utilities, CAWASA, CWWA, CARFA, and others. The assistance are trucking water to the communities in need, providing and installation of filtration plants and collapsible bladders, as well as storage tanks, and technical assistance. Now let me provide an update of the water situation in Dominica. For the critical areas in which we were not able to full restore water since September, I will call first the water area 1, Miro, Castaways Development and Cuba Road. Description of the damage was more in terms of our electrical pumping system. 100% water coverage is expected today, December 1st, 2017. We have 2 pump stations in the area, one to supply water to the upper part of Castaways Development and the other to the upper part of Cuba Road at Miro. A mobile generator was deployed to supply water to these areas on November 24th, 2017. This mobile generator is being shared between these 2 communities, Castaways Development and Cuba Road. And at present, we are pumping water to Castaways Development. Meanwhile, we are still carrying out pipeline repairs on the distribution network. Second area, continue, Coliho. We suffered damage to the intake, supply, and distribution networks were affected. And I'm very happy to say that right now we achieved 100% water coverage at Coliho on November 30th, 2017 by constructing access road, intake reconstruction, supply, and distribution pipeline repairs. Next, water area, Colibistri, Monrachet. We suffered damage to the intake, supply, and distribution pipelines. The lower section of Colibistri has water, but the volume of water supplied is still being investigated. And we are expecting that at least by the 10th of December, to be able to supply water from Portsmouth water system, meaning that we have some sections of that network from Portsmouth that still need to be backfilled and repaired before we can supply the volume of water required for Colibistri and Monrachet. Meanwhile, we have a filtration plant installed at Colibistri, and we are continuing with daily trucking the water to the communities of Monrachet and Colibistri. Next community, Dublin Bioche. We had some damage to the distribution network, and as now, the water is restored from Portsmouth water system since November 9, 2017, and Bioche and upper areas, the water was restored from November 17, 2017, supplied by, from the Portsmouth water system. Good Hope, Petit Soufre, Mopo, Chuanto, Dipa. We suffered damage to the intake at Saint-Sauveur. Supply and distribution networks were affected. In all the areas that I called, Good Hope, Petit Soufre, Mopo, Chuanto, Dipa, we supply water via pumping. We already completed our electrical rewiring work since November 18, 2017. We installed 3 collapsible bladders on November 29, 2017, that we can truck water to fill the bladders and supply water to the community. Meanwhile, DOWASCO is pursuing the purchase of generators which will arrive in Dominica before December 22nd, 2017, and therefore we'll be able to pump water to these communities and have a very consistent supply of water. Bellevue Chopin, we have loss of intake, supply pipeline, access road were compromised, and is an area that we have as well the electrical pumping system. At present, access road was cleared. We start the rehabilitation of the intake on November 24th, 2017, and we are expecting to receive and install the generators by December 15. As such, we continue to truck water to that area and carrying out the works. We are committed to supply the water at least before December 31st, 2017. Girardel, Eggleston, Reigate, Upper Castle Comfort, Pierce, that is located in the upper part of Kings Hill. We suffered intake damaged, the basin very silted, supply pipeline was washed away, and further damaged, our armored cable in the area were compromised. At present, the access road reconstruction is completed. Supply pipeline replacement started on November 23rd. And DOWASCO is at present pursuing to bring the electrical cables and the splicing kits required by air freight to Dominica to minimize shipment delivery time. We are expecting full water coverage by December 22nd, 2017. WANA. We have in WANA the electrical pump system, in which I'm pleased to inform our residents in WANA that on November 30th, 2017, we achieved the deployment of 1 generator that will be stationary and solely dedicated for pumping water to WANA community. I'm saying that because we had another generator in the area, but we have to deploy to other parts of Dominica in order to assist with the efforts to supply water. But as now, we are expecting to start the pumping of water to WANA community today, and we will have a more consistent water supply. Trafalgar, Shafford, Foncani, intake was damaged. Supply line near intake as well, we lost the supply pipeline, damage to the intake, loss of distribution pipelines as well. The water service was restored to Trafalgar on November 15, 2017. At Foncani, we had to install 1,600 feet of pipeline and bypass a series of landslides. The water supply was restored in Foncani on November 26 and 27, and Shafford, the water supply was restored on November 25, 2017. We are still works on the second intake that is located at Water New Haven, and the schedule for completion of these works are December 20th, 2017. With the completion of these works, we'll be able to full supply other communities such as Coptol and as well Water New Haven. Water New Haven has water from another source, but originally we supplied Water New Haven from this source that is now under repairs. Bagatelle, Fonsejan, Fab, we has loss of intake, loss of supply pipeline. Rehabilitation of the intake and pipelines were completed. The water was restored on November 10th to Bagatelle and Fonsejan and Fab on November 13, 2017. And so we have 100% water coverage in that area. Benz, Dodan, description of damage, all of them are similar. Damage to access road, supply pipeline, and intakes. Access road rehabilitation was completed. Supply pipeline repairs 98% completed. The water will be restored on December 1st, 2017. And you expect the full restoration by December 3rd, 2017. The reason I said we are expecting still full restoration because when we supply the water, we'll have to continue pipeline repairs on the distribution network, sometimes for the next 2 days, 3 days, until we completed the repairs on the entire distribution network. Peibush, Mopac, Thibault, Born, Dodan, include areas of Terplat, Belmanier. We completed the works at the access road. On November 30th, 2017, we start a new project to lay 3,500 feet of 6-inch ductile iron pipes on support. We are expecting the full water coverage by December 25th, 2017. Meanwhile, all these areas that I called that are still without water, we continue to truck water daily. Wesley, Woodford Hill, Marigot, we completed the rehabilitation of the access road. On November 17, 2017, we start the works in terms of access road, supply pipeline works, clearing, and we are expecting the full water coverage to the communities of Wesley, Woodford Hill, and Marigot by December 24th, 2017. At present, Marigot has water, and we are supplying Marigot community from another water system that is located at Crapo Hall that we call North End Water System. Delis Boitica. DOWASCO is working in coordination with Domilec in order to solve a problem in terms of the step-down transformer to enable installation of a generator that we can supply water to these communities. Ongoing, we have the works at the intake in terms of rehabilitation of the supply pipeline from the intake to the storage tank. The water service is expected to be restored by December 20th, 2017. Next area that is a small community, Tobino, Gomier. Before we supply that community with water from the Veicas water system, and is a electrical pumping system as well. As such, we are making provisions to have a generator installed in order to enable us to supply water to Tobino Gomier community at least by December 10th, 2017. I would like to take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks to the public, our customers, water users, for the patience and understanding on the challenges that DOWASCO is facing at this point of time. To our staff, the Board of DOWASCO management, for the level of dedication, commitment, efforts, long, hard working hours to supply the country with potable water. And of course, we would like to extend thanks to our Ministry of Housing, Lands and Water Resource Management for the support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivanira James, the Operations and Maintenance Manager at DOWASCO. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I will invite to the podium the Chief Engineer of DOWASCO, Mr. Magnus Williams.
Thank you and good morning. Sorry. All right, thank you. Good morning to all. Well, Mrs. James gave a very comprehensive picture of where we are with regard to water supply in Dominica. And actually, she said a few things that I wanted to say. But as Mr. Blackmore said, I will try to focus on some of the engineering aspects and what we plan to do going forward. So just to give a quick synopsis of really what took place. Mrs. James touched on some of that already, but as you know, we were impacted by Hurricane Maria, which affected all sectors, and it's particularly the water sector, leaving a lot of our supply infrastructure in critical states of disrepair. We had intakes being washed away, pipelines being washed away, intakes being silted. We had a lot of damage to all our access roads to some of our facilities, which hindered our ability to repair some of these systems because first we had to create access. So the situation was quite dire. Of course, Dominica, at DOWASCO, we operated 42 water systems, seeing that 2 of them, that's Spirit 7 and Dubic, were decommissioned after Erica. So previously it was 44. And as Mr. Blackmore said, we had critical damage to most of them. Just about 3 or so were able to be up and running from the day after the storm. Now, in terms of the impact of the storm, it affected our ability to supply water, and as Mrs. James said, we were able to engage in a lot of temporary recovery activities in order to try to restore water service as soon as possible. In the meantime, there were a lot of relief activities ongoing because our focus was first to focus on immediate relief to our customers, temporary recovery activities, and then focus on rehabilitation of the systems with the aim of building back better to provide more climate resilience into our designs. So in the event that we are faced by a similar situation in the future, our systems will be more robust and be able to withstand those impacts, and will be able to have a consistent supply of water even after the storms. So with regard to building back better, one of our first things we are focusing on is something that actually was ongoing from after Tropical Storm Erica, supported by the CDB, is to do a strategic climate vulnerability assessment of all our water systems. And with this assessment, basically we would look at all our water systems, look at all the ways that they are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, because as we know, the experts tell us that we expect to get situations similar to Erica and Maria more frequently in terms of heavier rainfall, more frequent rainfall, heavier flooding. So we have to find ways to adapt to those, mitigate the impacts of this. So this is the aim of the strategic climate vulnerability assessment. It will focus on all the water areas, and from there it will provide guidance into the Build Back Better process, where we will focus on designs for specific water areas, specific water systems. That process, we had already prepared the terms of reference for that consultancy, and I was recently informed that they're trying to facilitate and expedite the process because a similar activity was ongoing in some other islands, and they plan to use the same consultant, which will shorten the procurement, because we were thinking of sending out expressions of interest to get that consultant. So they will just retain the same consultant, modify the terms of reference a bit, so that they can fast track the process of doing the climate vulnerability assessment for Dominica. Some of the things that we expect that will be looked at in terms of building back better is, first of all, to choose water sources that are less vulnerable to the potential impacts from the climate change activities. A lot of our water supply abstraction infrastructure are located within rivers. We're looking at our transmission lines that are, for the most part, adjacent to riverbanks and really subject to flooding. So in cases where that's inevitable, of course, you look at improving the robustness, as I mentioned, looking at different ways of installation, different piping materials. We're looking at possibly relocating some of these to areas that are less vulnerable, looking at backup systems, for instance, having more than one intake, also having sources that are characteristically different from each other, so they may not necessarily be impacted in the same way by a particular event. So in the event one goes down, another one that was not impacted, we can then switch over to that one. Looking at increasing our storage in our systems. So in the event that we do have a shutdown for a period, at least we'll be able to have sufficient water in storage that can be used to provide in the meantime until the source can be put back up. Again, improving our water treatment. One of the things that have been affected the most is our water quality in terms of turbidity levels, and even our ability of our existing treatment systems to handle the level of raw water that is coming into our systems. So improving the level of water treatment, whereas with additional, let's say, sedimentation, filtration, advanced filtration. So these are some of the things that will be looked at. And again, I mentioned that some of our sources are in vulnerable areas. A lot of this has to do with our dependence on gravity-fed systems, where we need to have these intakes high up in the watersheds to be able to rely on the gravity and reduce our operational costs. So in cases where we may have to relocate these to more secure areas further downstream or away from the rivers that we cannot then rely on gravity, we may have to use more pumping. And in order to really reduce our operating costs, we have to look at more renewable energy options, for instance, solar pumps and so on, and more energy efficient methods, and also having backup power. As Mrs. James mentioned, one of our key challenges right now is the fact that our power to all our systems are affected because of the damage to the national grid. And we have 20 pump stations which were down because we do not have the power to pump. So in those areas, it would have been good if we had more backup power. Mrs. James mentioned that we did have one mobile generator, but we never expected that all our systems to be so impacted simultaneously, and we are in the process of procuring generators. So in the addition to power from the grid, we will look into, for instance, having alternative solar power for the systems and still having standby generators, because also, even though it's a small contribution, but we also have to think about our contribution to the carbon footprint, and mitigating climate change impact has to do with using less fossil fuels. So we do not want to rely full-time on generators. It will be more as an emergency backup mechanism. And one other possible alternative source in terms of water, I think I mentioned at the previous briefing, was groundwater. That should be looked upon as an option where we explore. First of all, we need to explore our potential, know exactly what's the status of our aquifers, and the yield and basically the recharge rates and all these necessary hydrological investigations need to be carried out. So at least we can have options. So in the event that we use a surface source and that is somehow compromised, we can just immediately tap into all our groundwater resources as a reserve or as a backup until we can return to using our surface systems. I mentioned about looking at different methods. Obviously, the design of our intakes is something that has to be looked at because our intakes, they get silted very quickly when we have any heavy flooding, and there are alternative designs that may help mitigate against the impact of that flooding on the intakes and the ability to abstract water. So these are the kind of ideas and things that will be looked at. And as I mentioned, the first step is to look at a broader picture in terms of overall vulnerability assessment. And of course, then that will pursuant to that, there will be studies for specific water systems. We'll also, during these design periods for those design phases, look a lot more at the hydrology and the hydrogeology of these systems and really not just look at just the basic civil engineering aspects, but really do a comprehensive analysis of all options, because the idea is that, as I mentioned, to build back better and to have systems that will be resilient and be able to withstand even events more powerful than what we've experienced. That is the intention, that when we make investments, we don't have to go back every 2 years and spending the same money over and over again, because someone has to pay for that at the end. So basically, that's just an overview of, Mrs. James gave the overview of where we are, and this is just basically where we want to be in terms of building back our systems better. So if there's anything else, then we will take that during the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and the floor is now open for questions from the media.
Thank you very much, President Baptist. Good morning, Joseph Thomas here. Mr. Williams, you were the last person at the podium. You will be the first person to answer a couple questions from yours truly. And I am particularly interested in the work which is being collaborated between yourself and the Caribbean Development Bank in terms of getting your comprehensive rehabilitation effort going. You did mention that all efforts will be maintained in trying to build back better and stronger. A timeline, sir, do we have, because I understand there's a survey or some consultancy, some level of collaboration going on right now. Can you give us some timeline as to when you expect these studies and surveys to be completed? And of course, works to be started.
Okay, as I mentioned before, that process had started after Tropical Storm Erica. The terms of reference were already completed, and we expected that the consultancy itself would take a period of about 6 months. So now that I don't have all the details yet, because this information just came through, that they are now going to try to use a consultant from a previous ongoing study. So we expect that because that procurement process has now been shortened, if works, for instance, to start by somewhere this month or early January, then again we're looking at somewhere by about June. That's basically a preliminary timeline for when that study would be undertaken.
Mention was also made of the current access that you have to your systems. You, of course, experienced difficulty because there was no access and so on. Are we clear on that for now? Do you have a lot more access, or do you have total access to all your systems and what have you? Are we clear on this?
Well, we have now restored access to all the sites that we're working on rehabilitating. There's just, I think I mentioned in the previous briefing, an example is one of the systems like Kulibistri, where we spent about over $1 million to restore access after Erica and restore pipelines, and then that was completely washed away. And this is one of the areas where we are looking at an alternative to supply. So in areas like this, we did not focus on trying to restore access because we're looking at going a totally different direction. But for the areas where we plan to do restoration works to restore water by the end of the year, then we have been able to restore access to all these sites.
And the whole question of, let me see if I get it right here now, the whole question of what you'll be doing in regards to your energy supplies and energy sources. You made mention, if my memory serves me right, of solar and what have you, and how is that expected to impact? Because there is now talk of geothermal energy and that sort of thing. How are we expected to have this great impact on what is it you intend to do?
Well, as I mentioned, a lot of these measures will be as backups. But in the case where we do, well, let me just first of all say that the intention would be to utilize these solar systems. And if geothermal comes through, it means that, well, we expect that the price, when it comes through, we expect the price of power to go down, which would make our operations more affordable. But the intention is that if we can still install these systems, as long as we get the money to that initial capital works, then we have almost zero maintenance costs. So it will be our preference in those areas to use that. But I mentioned we will still have backup, let's say, generators in the event that those fail or those can be used. So with regards to geothermal over the fossil that's presently used, the main impact will be when we do choose to use power from the grid, we just expect it to be cheaper. But the main focus would be, as long as the monies can be available to do that initial investment, then we go and we install renewable energy options for our pumping stations.
Okay, just to further re-emphasize and to strengthen some of the points that Mr. Williams made in relation to the question asked by Mr. Thomas. Of course, the whole question of the arrangement of increasing the resilience of the water system through the initial initiative we have with CDB. We started off by seeking to improve the quality of the water service in Water Area 1, which is the main water area of the country, stretching from all the way from Hillsborough to Castle Comfort. So, of course, the municipality of Roseau would be a part and parcel of that. And that was to ensure that we would have increased this performance standard, the DOWASCO, by ensuring that there would be less unscheduled interruption. So one of the first things was to ensure that we upgrade the network by ensuring that there will be greater quality of the water, as we would say, less turbidity of the water system. Of course, during that time, we had the advent of Erica. And so right in mid of implementation of the project, we saw the need to go further to augment the reliability and robustness of the system. And so as we speak, we have tangible proof on the ground that some of the resilient measures that we took during that period, which had a further serious impact on the cost of the project to the tune of almost $29 million. What we did was to ensure in the Water Area 1, the main catchment area, the intake, is that of Antrim. Now, Antrim, over the last few years, we had serious incidents of landslide, happening in the vicinity of the upstream side of that intake. And what you find was a lot of the sediments would get into the intake system, and then DOWASCO would have to shut down the system within the slightest shower of rain that you had. So the decision was made to shift that intake upstream, meaning that you put it in a safe zone that you wouldn't have the incidence of slides, and then you would lessen the impact of siltation. So that was done, but that was prior to Maria. If we all go up to the Cochrane area now, you'll see the scars still very tangible and visible on the mountainside. Nevertheless, we also took the opportunity to increase our storage capacity. And so the storage capacity in Antrim area was increased by about 250,000 gallons, which is 250,000 gallons. So it means, therefore, we will have to shut down the system. You had more water in supply, in storage that you could supply to the people. Those measures are already in place. The other thing as well, we have to see, as was said earlier on, the access to the site has to be by road communication. And so we took the initiative as well as part of the resilience improvement coming from America to increase and improve the drainage systems on the road. Added to that as well, we had to increase the slope stability. And if you go today in the heights of Cochrane where the new intake is being built, you will see the road is very motorable. And the scars and the impact on the road was very minimal as a result of the improvement that we made. So those are already tangible realization and manifestation based on this initiative. I think it is very important to say as well, we realize that most of the areas that we have to run the transmission lines have to be through the channel or waterway. We also took the initiative to ensure that the routes for the transmission line were within more secured area. So you had less interruption from the whole question of landslide and washout of the pipelines. So Mr. Joseph Thomas, those are very tangible actions that we've already taken, and we can ensure that we will learn from those going forward. As it regards to renewable energy, of course, prior to the PM or the Prime Minister or the Honorable Prime Minister making the bold pronouncement of we being the first state to be one of a climate resilient country, we knew during our era of pursuing very vigorously our geothermal pursuit that we said we were going to be one of the first countries in the world to be totally carbon free, meaning that we'll have almost a zero carbon footprint. We could well understand the intrinsic connection in climate resilience and renewable energy. By we going with more suited renewable energy, it means therefore we'll be lowering our consumption of fossil fuel and of course lowering our carbon footprint. And by so doing, we will be enhancing our climate resilience because we will no longer be contributing so heavily to the whole question of the carbon generation undertakings. That is very important as well. In terms of renewable energy, Mr. Williams mentioned lower operating costs. But even prior to the lower operating costs, we have to take into consideration the whole question of reliability. Reliability meaning that you have less schedule on unscheduled interruption of the water, which is what all of us want. I make no excuse for that. I am also part of it. We're all part of it. The moment we realize we open the DOWASCO tap and there's no water, the chip scene and the complaints and everything else. And Mr. James and Mr. Williams, and Mr. Etinoff can attest to that I always give them the flag and tell them they have to be able to withstand the constant barrage and pressure because water is life. Water is essential. So do not give yourself any praises if 30 days pass and it's only one time we had the interruption. Half an interruption is already too many. So we understand that in an environment like that, reliability is the order of the day. So renewable energy will increase our reliability, and we've already started. Mr. Williams didn't tell you, I don't know why, that even in the new system we're doing, in our whole question of building back better, which we already started, in our model project at resettlement at Belleville-Chopin, we have to ensure, we're ensuring that we take the water from an area of a lot of serious stream flow from the Pichling Heights. But to get that water to Belleville-Chopin, since Belleville-Chopin is at a high elevation, we have to pump. We had to ensure that we got into our pockets to get almost $300,000 to get a renewable energy system for that water supply. So we already started the process, and this is where we want to go to ensure that we have the level of requisite service quality in going forward in what we do. The other aspect that we really want to emphasize, since going forward we want to improve the reliability and quality of the service, we also have to look at the whole question of cost and quality of service. With renewable energy, you will have a higher initial upfront cost, but the operating cost in the long run will be very minimal. And so it is in our best interest of DOWASCO to ensure that we go into renewable energy because the operating costs will be significantly lower as well. So there are very tangible benefits, as we can see from all sectors, and we're happy to see that we already started in that area. I also want to put a note of caution, not because we have started that we're going to take any comfort from that, because we realize that with the experience we have gained from Maria, that we really have to raise that bar maybe tenfold from where we are right now. And so the resources that will be required in terms of equipment, plant and machinery, and more importantly, the manpower aspect of it, because we're going to have to look now at a different type of engineering going at DOWASCO going forward right now at DOWASCO. We have to look at more innovative, more creative, yet still that is hinged and pinned very seriously to technologically advanced solutions and systems. And so I am happy to say we're not in it alone, and we are very fortunate and we're blessed to have the support of the global community without running the risk of leaving anybody else. I would say the World Bank, the PAHO, UNICEF, and all the other great persons and corporate citizens have been coming forward and ensuring that we have the requisite support and that. But at the end of the day, the focus and the emphasis has to start with us. It has to be driven from DOWASCO, it has to be driven from the ministry, and I can say without any further contradiction here that DOWASCO know that they won't be spared, because at the highest level it has been constant strain and constant pressure, and it is necessary. And I say to them all the time, just do not allow the pressure to get to your head, just keep it chest level. But it is the reality that we have. We have a serious situation at hand, and we cannot spare any effort in ensuring that we give our fullest attention to that. So, Mr. Thomas, I just wanted to reiterate some of the initiative and the commitment we have made so far in ensuring we improve the reliability and resilience of the system.
Hi, good morning. Rhonda Luke from the Chronicle newspaper. Can any preliminary figures be given in terms of damages, how much the company has suffered post-Maria, and in terms of building a resilient system, how much is the company expect to spend in terms of building resiliency?
Yes, so a preliminary damage assessment was done, and the estimated cost to build back better with full resilience for the entire network has been preliminarily estimated to be in excess of $140 million for entire water and sewage network. To date, we've spent probably in excess of $3 million just on relief activities so far. But just to reiterate, we expect that to fully restore systems with a high level of resilience, that the estimate is probably about over 140 million. And that will be refined as we go forward and we do these studies, and we'll have a more, accurate picture later on. EC dollars, yes.
Mrs. James, you want to? Mr. Blackmore wants to add to that.
The question that Ms. Luke asked is a very tricky one. The reason why I say it's a tricky one, because the situation is not static, nor is it constant. I know while we had the preliminary rapid assessment, we had some very serious internal debate that we have to look at. When we look at the damage effect and impact, we also have to take into consideration the consequences and how we go forward in strategizing. Clearly, if we're talking about having almost like a leapfrog jump from where we are to where we're going to go, when you take into consideration the repair and replacement cost, the repair and replacement cost is going to be a subset or a combination of the damage plus the needs. So what the chief engineer just give you is more a part of the initial damage. But if we have to look at very seriously going forward, we cannot separate the two. So you look at basically part of the damage and the needs, because the needs is important, because the needs is part of the building back better. And the building back better, because you're going to have a higher standard. Higher standard will mean better material, and better material also is sometimes equivalent with higher cost and everything else. So what we are looking at initially, and we're still on the thing, well, is in excess of $400,000. But that doesn't look seriously at the reconstruction, because the reconstruction, as I said to you about, is going to take new forms, new approaches, new systems, and new considerations. And so I think maybe in the next couple of weeks, we will be able to have a more tangible figure as far as the reconstruction aspect is concerned, because we have to liaise a little more with our regional partners or international partners, because we really have to leave that bar right now. So it cannot be a comme habitude, as they will say in French. It's a different dispensation, and as a result of that, the reality is going to be different. There's still a very string line that we have to look between affordability and cost. But at the end of the day, the level of disruption is one that we have to put into context, and we really want to ensure that to minimize the disruption, that we'll have to have initial higher costs. So it's more in the region, Ms. Look, for the time being, of in excess of $400,000. And the figure is expected to change, because as we keep looking at the reconstruction aspect, the higher systems and we're looking in place will have greater implication for costs.
Thank you all, the media present here at the briefing room of the Office of the Prime Minister. Thank you to all the speakers at the podium representing DOWASCO, starting with the head, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Water Resource Management, Mr. Lucian Blackmore, Ivanita James, the Operations and Maintenance Manager at DOWASCO, and Magnus Williams, the Chief Engineer at DOWASCO, the Dominica Water and Sewerage Company. Thank you one and all. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day and enjoy the weekend.